let me start by asking you this. And it's rumored that you are thinking of going to Iowa soon to maybe do some exploratory work. And my question is, why would you consider a job that has a smaller home and an older plane than you currently have?
That's a very tough question and a very good question. Well, first of all, David called me. He said, would you do this? When David calls, I say yes. When other people call, maybe not so much. But it's a great honor to be here tonight, I must say, and it's an amazing group. So many friends. One of them is David Bossi, who right now is heading up that dinner and that whole weekend. And he said, in Iowa. And he said, would you do it? And I have great respect for David and what he's done and what he represents. And so I agreed to do it. And it's going to be a great event. Like, this is your biggest sellout crowd. I think we're going to have the biggest sellout crowd that they've ever had in Iowa, too, from what I'm understanding. So I look forward to that. But I'm actually also going the night before. There's a real estate dinner in Iowa, done by a very, very big company and a terrific company. And they asked me to be the keynote speaker. So I'm there for two reasons: real estate and politics.
Okay, so, but let me finish that up. Are you considering maybe getting into politics as a candidate or running for president, or you're not sure yet?
Well, I've been building buildings all my life. We've done a great job, as you understand. And one thing about David, if he didn't think we did a good job, I wouldn't be here tonight. That I can tell you. But we've done a good job, and I am considering it very strongly. A lot of people think that I have fun with it, that I'm playing games, that I enjoy the process, and I do enjoy the process to a certain extent. But the country's in serious, serious trouble. We just, as you know, we just broke $18 trillion in debt, largely to different places like China and others. And we just are in very, very serious trouble. So I am considering it very strongly.
Wow. So when do you think you might make a decision?
Sometime after the beginning of the year, probably sometime in March, April, or May.
Okay. So you wouldn't start below the top job. The president's the top job. You wouldn't start a little bit lower, no? Governor or something, just to get a little experience in the governor?
I've dealt in politics all my life. All of my life I've been in politics, and usually as a supporter on the other side, and I support a lot of different people, and people that I think are going to be good. I'm a Republican, but I'll support people that I really think are going to be good. And frankly, I just think we need something very good, very fast, or we're going to be in very big trouble as a country. And a lot of it's common sense. For instance, the torture report. Do we have to announce the torture report? Which, by the way, cost $40 million to do. I'm trying to figure out, how does this report cost $40 million? They paid these couple of guys $40 million. They paid $80 million to come up with the process. And there's so much, there's so many things that I see in this country, whether it's common sense or whatever. And I have a big voice. I have, millions and millions of followers on Twitter and Facebook. And when I say something, some people don't like it, but most people do like it. And whether it's jobs, and the thing I like best, and I think the thing that I'm best at, is the economy and how to put people to work. And that's what we need in this country.
All right. The campaign is typically a 2-year process.
Right.
And then if you're elected president, you have to spend 4 or 8 years at it, right in the peak of your earning period. You would say that's okay?
Well, I have a great company with tremendously talented people. I have some of those people sitting right here at the table, some of my executives, but I also have children. I have 3 of my 5 children are in the company, Don, Eric, and Ivanka, and they've done a fantastic job. And 4 years ago, I was leading in the polls. I was beating everybody in the polls, and what happened is I just really was loving what I do. I love what I do. I would rather do what I'm doing than run for president. But I also love the country more, and I just think that unless I see somebody that's outstanding, I would very much be inclined to do it.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't think you can make any more news than you just made, so... All
right, let's go home, folks.
All right. So let's start back at the beginning, if we could. All right. Your father was a pretty prominent real estate developer in, not in Manhattan, but in
Brooklyn and Queens. Yes.
So as a young boy, you would say you were aggressive, maybe, and you were sent to a military academy?
I was sent to military academy. My father said, you need a little discipline. You're sort of tough to handle. And they sent me up to a military academy, New York Military Academy, where we had some really tough people working up there. And, I was supposed to be a very smart person, but I was on the aggressive side. And they were terrific. These were drill sergeants We had one Major Tobias, used to be Sergeant Tobias at the time. He got promoted over the years to Major, and now he's actually a colonel, and he's very old, but he's a great guy. And he was tough. And you didn't talk back to him. Today you couldn't do this, okay? This was a different world. But you just didn't talk back to this guy, or it was bad, bad trouble. And I mean, today they call it harassment. That would be the biggest front page of every newspaper. But it was a good place, and it was a tough place. And I ended up graduating at the highest rank, so I acclimated. You know, you have to acclimate. You have a climate. And it wasn't my climate, but by the time I was there 5 years, and by the time I finished, I graduated at the highest rank. And I learned a lot about leadership, and I learned a lot about a lot of things. And
so you were an athlete. You were the captain of the baseball team? And
I was,
did
yes.
you ever think about being a professional baseball player?
Well, I always was somebody that loved sports, and I always did well at sports. And I love baseball in particular. I was on the football team, and I was on the wrestling team. Not a great wrestler, not a great basketball player. I had bad jumping ability. I just was not able to get up there. But I was a very good baseball player, and I guess I always did think, you know, I was recruited, and they all wanted me to go in Major League, and I was a little different. Today, those days, you'd make $3. There was no money, no anything. And ultimately, my father had a business in Brooklyn, mostly in Brooklyn, New York, and as a real estate developer. And ultimately, I did that for a lot of the right reasons, and it became a lot of fun. I wanted to make it more exciting, and you know, I always loved show business, and I loved other things, but I think we put some show business into the real estate business.
Well, you went to Wharton after New York Military Academy, and you did pretty well there, majored in real estate or specialized?
Well, I majored in finance, and I liked finance, but I did well, and I loved the Wharton School of Finance. I always thought it was a great school.
But I read that at one point you thought about going into the film business.
Sure.
And what took you away from that?
Well, it's sort of an interesting story, but I went to, I actually applied to USC, where they had a great school of cinema. They said that was like the Wharton School of Cinema. And I applied, and what happened was a little interesting. There was a man who was having troubles in real estate, and he came to me, smart guy, and he said, could you help me? And I gave him, and I was only 19 years old, and I gave him a lot of advice. And this guy was a top Broadway producer. And I said, you know, I'd love to go to USC and all this stuff. I kept talking about movies. And he said, you know, I tell you what, you just saved my life. You really know real estate. You got to be crazy to go into show business. And it really affected me. And I went in with my father, and I was in Brooklyn for 5 years, my first 5 years. Went into the business with my father, did some really, really good deals for him. He was very, very happy with me. And he was a tough guy. He was very tough and had a great heart. He was a good man, but he was a tough man. And he would never let anybody sign checks, as an example. Under any, so he had to sign every check. You know, today they sign them by computer. I don't know about your company, I'm sure your company. But today you press a button and everybody gets paid. There's no negotiation. Whatever it is, if it's a mistake, they never find it. He would sign every single check, and he'd look, and he'd study it, and he'd call the people, you're getting too much money, you shouldn't be getting, this is a little different than we have today. So I actually continued that practice. I signed many, many, many checks. You know, the company's gotten so big it's hard, but I like signing checks because I see what's going on much better by doing that.
So what was it like? You go to your father, who, you know, was a tough guy to work for, and you said, Dad, I want to go on my own. What did he say?
He really respected it. You know, being in Brooklyn and Queens, and we'd look across the river, the East River, and I'd see those big, tall buildings. I say, Pop, that's what I want to do. I want to build those buildings. I want to be there. I love it. I got to be there. And he sort of said, that's not our territory. You know, like a lot of fathers would say. He said, you don't know anything about that, and that's not our territory. Let's stay in Brooklyn. And you know, my father started up building one-family homes and then apartments, for mostly middle-income apartments, almost all middle-income and some low-income, using federal subsidies, the 236 program. A lot of different programs. Section 8, we had a Section 8 program, which was amazing. They gave you the money for nothing. I mean, it was actually a pretty good program for the developer. But it also allowed people to live at a very low rent. And my father did a lot of that, and I did it with him, and we did it well. But I said, you know, Pop, I want to go in. And I started with the Grand Hyatt Hotel. I took an option, and I converted that to the Grand. It was originally the old Commodore Hotel. Sort of interesting how my life progresses, where we go from that to the OPO.
But make sure everybody understands, you were about 29 years old, or something like that, 28, 29. and you bought an old hotel that was near the Grand Central Station called the Commodore.
Correct.
And you put in no money. Is that right?
I put in almost no money,
Almost
yes.
no money. So how did you manage to do that with no money?
Well, it was owned by the Penn Central Railroad, and it was run by some very good people. Actually, it's very interesting because he happens to be a very good man. It was Victor Palmieri and Company, and one of the people is John Koskinen. Does anyone know John Koskinen? He's the head of the IRS, and he's a very good man. And while I am a strong conservative and a strong Republican, he's a friend of mine, and he did a great job running Victor Palmieri. And I made deals with John and the people at Victor Palmieri and took options to the building. And after I took options to the Commodore, I then went to the city because the city was really in deep trouble. I was about 28 years old, and the city was really in trouble. And I said, look, you're going to have to give me tax abatement, otherwise this thing's never going to happen. Then I went to Hyatt. I said, you guys put up all the money, and I'll try and get the approvals. And I got all the approvals, and Hyatt, Jay Pritzker and the Pritzker family, they put up the money. And we built a hotel. We were 50-50 partners, and it became very, very successful. Then I did the convention center and lots of other jobs.
So let's talk about one of the other very famous buildings you did, Trump Tower.
Right.
How did you get the right to build that piece of land, and how did you finance that?
Well, that was owned by a company named Conseco, and originally Genesco, and I guess you know Genesco. It was from Nashville, Tennessee. And Genesco was run by a father and son. It was a public company, and they were fighting like cats and dogs, unlike your children, and my children so far. We want to keep it that way, by the way. But they were fighting like cats and dogs, and I was reading about it because I love reading the financial papers, and at those times it was exclusively papers. Today it's a little bit papers and lots of other things. And I saw the trouble that they were having, that Genesco was in deep trouble, and I knew they owned Bonwit Teller Department Store. So I called the head of Genesco, and I went to Nashville, Tennessee, where I have a warm spot in my heart for Nashville, because I made an amazing deal there. I took an option to buy the site, and what happened is as soon as that option was announced, every developer in the world went there trying to buy, because even then it was the best site. You know, 57th and 5th next to Tiffany is the best site. But it was too late because I already had it signed. And they tried to get out of it because obviously they saw it was much more valuable than what I paid. And then I ultimately dealt with a great man named Walter Hoving, who was the head of Tiffany. And he took Tiffany to great levels. He took Tiffany from trouble to great levels. And I bought the air rights over Tiffany, and I bought the air rights over another place, and a few more air rights, and I ended up with a 68-story building that turned out to be a tremendous success, as you know, right from the beginning, called Trump Tower. And I guess one of the when I bought the air rights from Tiffany, I had the right to call it Tiffany Tower. And I went to a friend of mine, a very streetwise guy, Dennis Stein, and I said, Dennis, I have the right to call it Tiffany Tower, but I want to call it Trump Tower. What would you do? He said, when you change your name to Tiffany, call it Tiffany Tower. So I called it Trump Tower. Even though I had this incredible right, David, I had this incredible right to use the name Tiffany, but I called it Trump Tower, and it was one of the better things I've done.
If your name had been Rubenstein, you'd think it would have worked as well. Rubenstein Tower.
I think it might have worked very well. You know, hey,
so
Michael Bloomberg's done very well, right?
But you came up with the idea of putting your name on things and actually making a brand of it. And when did you actually realize that by putting your name on something, you could actually get maybe a higher price for it?
Well, a lot of people think it was, they wrote a big article recently, like I had this brilliant strategy of naming, and you know, honestly, it was sort of like just happened. It started with Trump Tower. I did the Grand Hyatt Hotel first in Manhattan. That was my first job. I did the convention center, Jacob Javits Convention Center. I took options to the land, got the state to build on it, and did well with it. And they built the Jacob Javits Convention Center. But you know, nobody knew that much about me. And then when I did Trump Tower, because I mean, I never thought at a young age, like 30, I would have the best piece of land in the world. It, you know, never changes. I mean, that piece of land was the best then, and it's the best now. We signed a lease with Gucci. That's one of the great retail leases ever signed, as you understand. And so I never really knew. And then when I called it Trump Tower, a lot of things happened because of the prominence of the location, the success of the building. I was able to get it zoned, and a lot of people said, you'll never be able to get it zoned. You'll never build a tall building. You'll never be allowed to build an all-glass, beautiful, monolithic building. Ada Louise Huxtable of the New York Times, the critic, the architectural critic, she gave it phenomenal reviews, just phenomenal. And then later on, Herbert Muschamp of the New York Times gave it phenomenal reviews. And what I did is it just morphed into other things, and then I ended up doing a book, The Art of the Deal, and that became such a great thing.
On that building, though, you live at the top.
I do,
triplex,
top 3 floors, yes.
Right, now, a lot of wealthy people are being sought after to buy buildings in New York, apartment buildings. Do you think all these Are there enough billionaires to fill all these big buildings that are being built in New York?
No, I don't think they'll fill them.
And
That's your second big story tonight.
all right.
I don't think you're going to fill. No, there are too many being built.
432 Park Avenue, you've seen this one, it's like 90
Well,
stories.
and they're friends of mine doing it, and don't forget, they have the advantage that it was early on, and they're very good people, and I think that it's going to do okay because it's early. But the ones coming online, I mean, there's so many of them. I look at the plans, I study real estate, I know every inch of Manhattan. I mean, I know which store is available 5 years before the lease comes due, and I look at all of the plans for Manhattan, and I just don't see any way. I mean, Russia's been taken out of it over the last year, as you know. Russia's gone, and a lot of the Russians that were buying these apartments are no longer buying apartments, and they've got bigger problems. And frankly, I just don't see any way they're going to do it. Now, that's an opportunity for you, and it's an opportunity for me. A man came to my office, I won't use his name, but he's a very well-known, very big developer. He has a site to build a 100-story building on the site. And I don't love the site, but it's good. Not great, but it's good. The great always works. The good doesn't always work, okay, in real estate. And he has a 90-story building, a 100-story building. You could do sort of whatever you want. And he wanted to sell it to me. And, I've been through great times, but I've also had to fight like crazy to keep everything going. And I said, you do it, because I don't have the guts anymore to do it. And he said, I promise I won't tell anybody you said that, Tyler. Nobody's going to. But it's true. I see the market I think, will be oversaturated.